Hi, this is Atlas coming to you with another speech, I guess. No, dialogue on the Bulldog Deep Space Fighter. I'm joined here by Ben Richards, and I know we had talked about this earlier in another podcast, but we really wanted to go into some of the details that we'd been informed of about the Bulldog. I know that you're super excited about this, Ben, so you can go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, for starters, we now know it's called the Bulldog. When we released our last video, we knew it was likely going to win the vote for the next Wave 4 ship, but we didn't have any information on it because it hadn't quite won yet, and the letter from the chairman wasn't out yet. So now we have a little bit of information on as to what to expect out of this craft. It is the Aegis Bulldog Deep Space Fighter. As I just mentioned, it is an Aegis design, which makes me really happy. We kind of have a lot of Aegis designs already, but they are my favorite aesthetically, in terms of the different ship designers. So I was really hoping that they would make this ship because I was really excited about what its role would be. And as I said, I really think their ship designs are just beautiful. So what do you think about it, Atlas?
I typically agree. I like Aegis, the aesthetics for their ships. I also kind of, if at least in my opinion, Anvil and Aegis depart aesthetically in that Anvil tends to have a lot of right angles in their designs, whereas Aegis tends to have a lot more organic flow for the the silhouette of the ship. So I actually would have been okay with either. I was kind of hoping Anvil was going to get the contract, but I'm not upset that Aegis is the designer of the ship either.
Right. I know some people were hoping it'd be something a little bit more obscure to break up some of the other companies', patterns like, say, MISC or RSI, something like that. But
Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with it.
And one of the things too to remember is that if you're continuing from the lore of the game, as if you take note with like even our government's weapon platforms, it's maybe a handful of companies who ever get the contracts. It makes sense that a majority of them would be fulfilled by the same companies over and over again up to a point.
Right. So, based on the document, we know that this is going to be an incredibly tough spacecraft.
Yeah, and that's, for me, I think that's one of the things I was looking for. To some degree, I can understand where a lot of people were coming from in regards to, getting another military ship in the wave of concept ships. But on the other hand, I was actually looking for something to fulfill a new role, which it sounds like this will be doing. And in that regard, having just a durable, ship to fly out into the middle of nowheres for a purpose is a very different design from anything that we have right now. So,
Right. I mean, they described the craft as, having multiple backup systems, stories of bulldogs limping back to base with a single engine and half their fuselage exposed to vacuum have become common as the battle against the Vandal has heated up. Stuff like that. That's really exciting to me, especially because I already consider the Hornet to be a fairly survivable frame. So we'll have to see how much more so the Bulldog is, comparatively speaking.
yeah, and one of the things, too, that struck me as interesting is when I was reading the description of the Bulldog, to me it didn't speak F-14 like I was hoping. Rather, I started getting the impression of an A-10 that shoots down other airplanes, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I was kind of getting that as well. So that's also really exciting. I'm also a big fan of the A10. So
Yeah, and if their designs are anything similar, I would also be super stoked.
yeah, they also mentioned that it is a modern Aegis design. Like this is a newer design from Aegis, and there's not too many of those. Most of the Aegis designs are a lot older, especially ships like the Retaliator. But I believe they have one other new ship, which was the Javelin.
Yeah, the Javelin destroyer.
Yeah, that's supposed to be a fairly new design from Aegis, but most of Aegis designs are older, and because they kind of fell out of favor, based on what I know about the lore from
The Messer era.
right.
Yeah. Actually, another thing to discuss about that too is I don't know if it's for better or worse, but having a modern design versus the classical design of Age of Ships, I think that gives designers a chance to change the aesthetic if that's what they're looking to do. When you have a whole new era of designers, obviously they don't have to keep in tradition with the way that older ships looked. They don't have to keep that same design pattern or those same themes. So, if they wanted to change the way that Age of Ships looked, this would be the time to do it.
Yeah, that's definitely true because they have 50 to 100 years of lore space in order to allow for the cycling out of new designers within the lore. One of the things that made me excited about this craft reading the description is that it was designed to operate from planets, which means it's likely going to have a design that takes a nod to being designed towards atmospheric flight, like, say, the Retaliator, for example.
Yeah, and definitely I think I've noticed I tend to have a preference for when ships actually look like they're designed to take into account air resistance. Not to say that ships like the Redeemer and the like don't super excite me. They do. But I think from the standpoint of a plane that just looks pretty to me, I always come back to what our planes look like today.
Right. I agree. I know a lot of people are kind of hoping there's more ships that, look like they were designed for space and not just look like, futuristic aircraft. And I understand that. But for me personally, aesthetically, I definitely prefer that more, aerodynamic look.
Yeah. So, there's a couple things that's discussed about the Bulldog that keeps in line with what we've been talking about so far. The idea that it's actually a planet-borne craft, but meant to travel far, it means something. Up until now, a lot of the craft that we've been discussing, like the Hornet and the M50, the Aurora even, they can all be launched, and they're supposed to be carried by other larger ships, like the Idris. I could say Bengal, but obviously none of us really know yet. But the idea is they're supposed to venture out deep into space on the back of another larger ship. And these are supposed to be much more self-sustaining. So, as a result, they have increased storage for ammo and fuel.
Right. And also, I believe they mentioned basic survival accommodation as well for the pilot and the radar operator, which I assume might be some kind of bunk or bathroom or something like that. I don't know. There might be a little bit of cockpit space in there. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it may end up being something not far in size from the Cutlass, but probably with a much bulkier design, I imagine.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what they do with this design. I'm taking into account things like living space needed for long distance flight, stuff like that. They'll probably look at some of our current long range bombers, probably for some inspiration on that.
Yeah, and something else too is, now that we grant that it's meant for chasing enemies into the deep unknown, there's going to have to be a jump drive on there. There's no way around that at that point. So there's certain things that we can take into account. I think, was there mention of a turret on the ship?
Gonna have to look at that again. Let me see. Yes. Okay. Yeah, the Rio, one of the Rio's jobs is operating the turret. It also has a missile loadout optionally and a highly advanced sensor suite. So it is operating in a pilot Rio configuration similar to the F-14 by the sound of it.
And because it's going to be on its own, it's basically it has to fulfill all the roles that you can normally split up between different ships too. Normally you would have a recon ship and then combat aircraft, and it looks like you have to pile all of that into a single craft now.
Right. It seems like you're going to have your Rio handling your, long-range scanning, checking out targets, stuff like that. And then once you get in close enough to dogfight, your Rio will be switching over to helping you defend the ship with the turret.
So there's a lot of things to take into account with the design. It looks like, at least as CIG sees it, the Bulldog is supposed to be, I don't want to say unsupported by other craft, but at least self-sustaining enough to that it can contribute to many of the other roles that would typically be split up among various craft in a fleet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could definitely operate as a part of a larger unit, but it doesn't have to, and that's the important distinction here.
Yeah. So that excites me personally. One of the nice things about that may be the fact that you could have 3 or 4 Bulldogs in a squad flying out into the middle of the unknown, and you don't have to worry pretty much about whether or not you lose your recon craft or your missile boat, because they're all those things.
Right. I think it'll be really interesting to see if we start seeing a lot of Bulldogs flying, as mentioned in our previous podcast, flying security for exploration vessels, because they don't have the range limitation that the Hornets do.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the fact that they're all going to be somewhat combat effective at the very least. They're all going to be somewhat effective as scouts. They're basically going to be a multi-role long-distance ship at that point. So I think in that regard, if you don't have an Idris or something to tow your Hornets out into deep space, this would be a great alternative, especially for those organizations or companies that have a lower, manpower than the really big ones.
Definitely.
All right, so we know it's a 2-seater. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about for the Bulldog?
Not really. Do you want to move on and just kind of cover our opinions on the designs that are currently up for vote?
Sure thing.
Okay. So up first, we got the search and rescue ship. I am kind of curious to see what they do with this, given the fact that we already kind of have the Cutlass Red, so it'll be interesting to see if they incorporate like a bigger design or something, maybe with cutting tools of some kind.
Yeah, and one of the things, too, that I've always wondered is that there's really 2 types of search and rescue that as we know it. The first form would be the common day one, where a hiker gets lost in the woods, you send out a helicopter and a search party to look for him. The second form, much more uncommon to us, but is still a fairly predominant form of it, is when you have friendlies go down behind enemy lines. What makes me think that this is probably going to be a heavier armed ship is the fact that you actually have to give up quite a bit on the Cutlass Red in order to get those life-saving capabilities. I'm curious to see if they're going to go for what's essentially a parajumper version of search and rescue.
I think that'd be really exciting. I mean, if you have a more heavily armed craft, or alternatively, a larger craft, but a larger craft designed with stealth characteristics.
Yeah,
to slip in,
or at least some means of being able to withstand or avoid a beating, like speed, armor, something to the point where you can go into the middle of a battlefield and be relatively unafraid.
Yeah, subtle and imposing, the Cutlass Red is not. So we'll have to see what they do with that. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that?
Not too much, no. The only other thing that I could think of is maybe a planet-borne search and rescue ship, or planet side, but the problem being I still don't know how ships flying in planet side is going to work, and whether or not there's going to be any interaction between ships and ground combat on planet side. So
yeah, I imagine something like that's probably going to be after the Persistent Universe launches at some point, but maybe not quite at the beginning.
So next down the list is the Recon.
Yeah, this is the ship I voted for. I think it'll be really interesting to see what they do with the Recon ship. I mean, we already kind of have something like this with the Hornet Tracker, the Hornet with the turret module replaced. Yeah, the Hornet with the turret module replaced with a deep scanning radar. So, but it'd be neat to see kind of a larger ship, what you could do with a larger ship that can contain a more advanced sensor suite and communications array.
Definitely something more meant for an armada or fleet, because it's one thing to have a ship or two running around the perimeter with a sensor array. It's another thing entirely to have one in the center of the fleet with a much expanded range for the sensors. So I would kind of like to see something like that, especially for those organizations that are larger and they have to coordinate a larger battle It'd be nice to be able to centralize that intelligence instead of having 4 or 5 pilots just rambling, the locations of enemies. So that's what I would like to see from the recon. Whether or not that's what's going to be, the idea behind it is a completely separate issue.
I see one other alternative use for a craft like this in a non-combat capacity. It would be one that's outfitted with sensors designed to pick up something like minerals, for example. Like if you're operating a mining company and you want to send one of these in to basically scan the system and find if there's anything valuable, for you to hit in that area without needing to, get as close. So you could, send it out there and it could scan a wide area and save you the time of going individually to like each asteroid and scanning it, or something like that. We don't really know how the mining aspect is going to work quite yet, but I think that'd be a good role for it as well.
Yeah. So outside of that, I don't have too much to say about the recon. Do you have anything more you want to share on it?
No, we can move on to the space bus.
Okay, the space bus, the magical space bus. Honestly, I understand why people are interested in transport. It seemed like a novel idea from a VIP perspective with ships like the Constellation Phoenix and the 890 Jump. I get a little less excited when you start talking about what's essentially the equivalent of public transit, because my experiences with it are not that great. But, who am I to get in the way of other people finding a way to enjoy the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be great if ships like this wind up in the game eventually. I pretty much prefer every other option to this option, but I do think that if this were to win, it'd be okay because it will flesh out the universe a lot more. I just personally don't want to be a space bus driver. Although you never know, it might be kind of fun. You might have to like stop and break up a fight between a Vandal and a Xi'an in the back of the bus.
If a Vandal is riding a human bus, I don't know. That's
you never know, man.
That's crazy. That's only in the verse.
Yes.
Yeah, Space Bus is definitely the lowest on my level of interest. I can definitely see why people would want it, and I can understand why it should be in the universe. It just doesn't rate on my, rank of interests at all. That being said, with a ship with a large capacity or volume, it makes me wonder what you could outfit it to do in the long run. Whether or not it could be converted into some form of smuggling ring, because you're transporting people, I think it would make it a lot easier and more common for, you'd be less suspected because you're going to be everywhere. You're going to be transporting people regularly. Taking smuggled goods from one sector to the next in public transport is probably one of the most common ways of doing it. So I would expect that there would at least be some fun twists to the ship, depending on what you can do to mod the ship over time.
Yeah, I mean, and there's other options too. You could always buy one on the cheap because it's just a space bus and unbolt all the seats and turn it into a cargo freighter. I mean, that is actually a fairly common practice today with, there's 747s out there that they have stripped all of the, people carrying capacity out of, and it's just a big cargo hauler.
Yeah, so depending on the level of modularity, I would say there could be a lot of utilitarian use for the ship. So in a lot of respects, actually, you could probably, from my perspective, look at it a lot like the Aurora.
A lot of options,
yeah.
Not much glamour.
Yeah. So the final, I think, option left is the boarding and assault ship,
which I know you're quite excited about.
That did have my vote. I know a lot of people speak about boarding ships and they say, "Oh, well, you have the Cutlass. What else do you need?" And I approach it from the idea that the Cutlass isn't actually a troop transport ship per se, and actually neither is the Redeemer for that fact. The idea of a boarding assault ship specifically is to attach itself to a larger ship. I would think Idris class and above, which is likely to have a lot more people in it than a Cutlass could, hold. So the idea would be you need a ship that could attach in multiple places and just unload troops like it's nobody's business. Like it has no other purpose. And equipment taking up any other space is essentially superfluous. So I think back to like the landing ships on Normandy for something like this. Like, it has a mouth that opens up, a pilot, and propulsion, and the rest is just empty space to be filled with troops, which is not something currently being fulfilled by any other ship in the galaxy as we know it.
Right. And it'll be interesting to see if a ship like that might have. I mean, I know you were saying other stuff superfluous, but it'll be interesting to see if they add some extra features to that ship to make it better at its job. Maybe some electronic warfare suites, so they can get close enough to latch on.
Maybe like a breaching, some kind of weapon system or shield so that you don't just get gunned down from the moment of landing.
Right.
Maybe
some way of overriding airlocks so you don't have to blow them open.
Yeah, I mean, I could see those tools at least having some function, as long as they don't take up a ton of space. One other thing to note probably is that whatever it was, you'd probably want it to be big enough to hold mechanized armor.
Yeah, that'd be nice. So you could, go forth with your, mech suits.
Yeah. Because, I mean, honestly, who wants to be the first flesh and blood and bone body through a breach? Not me. That's not my envisioned, moment of glory.
Not when you can be in the power loader from Aliens, but with guns on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
Right. Well, if we look at what the polls are saying currently, there is about 20,000 votes. Honestly, it's close enough. I could see it swaying one way or another, but it's been holding pretty steady since it went up. So I think it's probably going to stay this way. Boarding assault ship is currently winning at 35%. The space bus is at 33%. Recon craft is at 18%, and the search and rescue ship is at 14%. So I think it's very close between the first and second, and then in the third and fourth, like you're pretty close there too. But I think likely the boarding assault ship is going to win, and I'm actually not sure. Have they been dropping the lowest or the two lowest when they drop?
This list seems significantly shorter than I remember. It's honestly, I don't know. I think they're dropping the lowest and taking the winner, so two are missing from the list every time.
Okay.
Which is kind of a bummer because I think Search and Rescue would be tied for second for me with Recon.
Yeah, same. But there's a lot of people out there who are really excited about the passenger liner, and I give that to them. I don't think it's a bad idea anyway. So, and we can always outfit something in universe that might fulfill a similar role to whatever the dedicated Search and Rescue ship would be. That's how I look at it, at least.
Yeah. I mean, and we do, in fact, have the Cutlass. And
yeah.
This may be kind of greedy, but, we're a small organization. The odds of us needing something much larger are not high.
Besides, screw it. If it ends up being a big problem, you could always get a Constellation Taurus and then just, pack it full of medical supplies.
True. Or the Aquila. Or even, doesn't the Carrack have a medical bay on board?
It does. I'm actually really curious to see more information about that when they do the concept sale for it, because it's supposed to be an incredibly self-sufficient ship. And as we talked about earlier with the Bulldog, something that can go really far, be very self-sufficient, is a really appealing design to both of us. And so I'm really curious to see what the Carrack brings to the table at what price point. I think it's supposed to be about the same size as a Constellation, or maybe a little bigger, somewhere in that.
Given
category.
The facilities it has on board, I could see it being a little bit more expensive because it comes with a repair bay, a medical bay, and a few other things, including a large sensory suite. I would guess around the $300 range if I had to ballpark it.
I'd say that's probably a good guess. Yeah.
So yeah, that is another ship I'm very interested to see come down the pipeline from the concept sale. I'm a little bummed actually. One of the things I think would be really cool about this whole voting process would be to also vote on the manufacturer as well as the ship design. There are certain... I understand why people were like, I don't want Anvil or Aegis, because those are the preponderance of ships that we're seeing recently, with the exception of Origin, I think. But Roberts really hasn't had a lot of ships come out lately. Misk does have the whole seat coming down the pipeline, which is kind of cool. And I would like to actually see a little bit more from Consolidated Outlands. I would want to see what else they're working on besides the Mustang.
Right.
And one other thing that I feel like is gravely missing is snub fighters, because we just are not seeing anything about them at all.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with snub fighters is they're a very limited role. I mean, as of right now, there's only one ship that can. No, I take that back. There's two actually. I was gonna say there's only one ship that can carry snub fighters commonly, but I guess you could say the 890 jump is fairly common and it can carry a snub fighter.
Well, I don't know if it's what do they call it, a skipper or something like that. But yeah, the
Yeah.
same role essentially, right?
I mean, if you can fit that in there, you can probably fit
Yeah.
a snub fighter in there. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if like people have been talking about this on the forums. I don't know if Cloud Imperium's gonna make this happen or not, but maybe converting some of the torpedo bays in a retaliator to be able to drop a snub fighter or something. But that might be a little too constrained for something like that.
Yeah. But that is, I don't know. I feel like some of these things, like has been talked about, they do, if they don't have a direct equivalent already in the verse, like search and rescue or recon, they have something pretty close. So it would be nice to see them venture into new territories instead of expounding on ones that we've at least touched on already.
Right. I mean, it would again that'd be a reason I'd be okay with, say, the passenger liner winning, even though I'm like, haha, space bus. I ain't driving no space bus. I mean, it fleshes out the universe more, and so that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I could see why some people might say, "Oh, well, we have the 890 jump," but that's a $600 ship.
Yeah.
I mean, let's get serious here. Most people cannot afford something like that, and if they want to get into, transporting people, not everyone has to do it in what's essentially the equivalent of like a Lincoln, limousine. That's not the way that most of us are going to travel around town. So, I do appreciate the space bus for what it offers, outside of what's already existing, because at least the Cutlass Red is somewhat affordable. At least the Ghost Track or the Hornet Tracker is somewhat affordable. The 890 jump is definitely a luxury item.
Even the Constellation, the Phoenix, is quite expensive
Yeah.
when it was available.
Yeah, I mean, you could do transportation of people probably in the Phoenix or in a constellation like Taurus or Andromeda. Those aren't so bad. But yeah, they're still significantly more expensive.
I am curious though, like with the passenger liner, if they're gonna go, full like cruise ship size, or if they're gonna go like taxi cab.
I'm hoping to go, at least like a city bus size.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know that there'd be a lot of money in it for people who are trying to do that as a living in the game.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty much the rest of Wave 4 that we have to look forward to. I don't know how many more votes we have left. But, if you haven't voted yet, go in there, give it a shot. Hopefully, whatever you vote for survives or wins. So, this is Atlas signing off. I think that's the whole list, Ben.
Yep, that is it. So I hope anyone that listened to this enjoyed the episode. If you have any comments or criticisms or anything like that, be sure to post them down below. And have a great day.